Hey, this is Chris with Destination Art, and today I am experimenting with some cityscapes. I really love cityscapes. I really love the way some people paint them, and they just look so gorgeous, so I'm practicing that. The first painting that I'm showing you here is sort of a fantasy cityscape that actually used a sci-fi book and just copied some of the details from the buildings on there. My idea here was just to sort of stack them on there, make it look like a big city, and just paint them. And try to use the three-step process that I've been using, which is establish form with, just basic colors, then establishing some shadows, and then finally adding the details. Now, for this, I use just watercolor paints to establish the colors and the forms of the buildings. Then I used a Tombow marker to kind of lay in where all the shadows are, and finally I used a Pigma Micron pen to add the details. So in this part right here, I am just picking different shades of sort of neutral colors to establish where the buildings are. And then I go in and so I have to bounce around a little bit and make sure that some areas are dry, or I go from one dry area to another dry area. So you do that with flowers and stuff like that. You bounce around and you wait for something to dry while you're painting somewhere else. So my goal was to not have flat color in each of the areas too. So sometimes I drop in a little bit of color. Sometimes I was lifting up some color with my brush or with a paper towel. And then also, I did notice at the end that I thought everything was kind of bland looking, so I didn't get it in the video, but I did add a pop of color to each of the roof line. So I just added that thing that I'm working on right there. I'm adding stripes or streaks to the glass, and I thought that was kind of a nice technique to do that. So I just used a damp brush and lifted the color that I put down. So that building, though, I did add, like I said at the very end, I did add some more color, because ultimately when you paint something, you need it to be, where you have a focal point, and it leads your eye through there. And since this isn't a traditional landscape or anything, it's just a bunch of buildings that I decided to practice on. I decided to use sort of the eye flow thing as color. Sometimes you can use it as value, and this time I kind of chose to use color for that. So I'm going in with a Tombow marker, and I'm adding just some shadow areas under the roof, or there's that weird building at the bottom where I was putting stuff down. I chose the lightest Tombow marker that I had, and I didn't think it was quite dark enough, so I went and got the next step up. And thankfully these are water soluble, because I then went in with a light brush and sort of smoothed out one edge, because it's really nice to have, of course, shadows that have a hard edge and a soft edge. It just makes it a little bit more interesting. So there I am with the brush, and I'm softening that one edge. So the one edge behind the building is sharp, and then when it comes for you toward the front, sorry, why don't I get tongue-tied? When it comes toward the right, then I wanted it to be softer. And so just bouncing around and adding different levels of shading to some of the buildings. And then I went in with my Micron, and I added just some outlines to some buildings and some details. So I can see where this process is going to be very helpful in the future once I practice it a whole bunch more. But it's going to be really important in the future when I travel, because I named my channel Destination Art because I like to travel and paint. So far I've been on one trip and I didn't paint because we were busy the whole time, and there was a hurricane. So anyway. So yeah, so that's my plan. And like, this was a guy, I learned this technique from a guy who did a video. Actually, it wasn't his video, it was somebody else's. He was like just teaching on the video. But it was a three-step process, as I said, where you establish form, establish shadow, and then establish details. And here I am, once again, using the Tombow and just eking out, just figuring out where there's shadow, where there should be some detail, windows. I bounce around a little bit with the pen and just try to add some, some details here and there. I think I actually got a little bit bigger pen and started trying to do a little bit more of an illustrative style where you have slightly thicker line or a thicker connection point where you have two lines that intersect, that you add a little bit of a thicker line underneath there just to make it a little more interesting. So I tried that, and then, as I said, when I noticed it later, I decided that I needed to pop the roof on each of the buildings a little bit more. So here is the final painting where I added a little bit more depth to that color that was on the roof. So, and then I was playing around again, and I decided to try this little composition, and that's basically, I was just using 2-point perspective on a bunch of buildings, right? So it's just practice, and I could go a lot farther in learning some architectural details that I can add to buildings, even if I'm doing a fantasy or a building from my imagination, which I don't have yet, and I wasn't pushing to try to get that type of detail in this painting, which is, a goal that I can move toward. But for right now, I wanted to just play with the shadow more than anything else and establishing the form. So that's why I tried to use, the advanced 2-point perspective. So I was watching a video the other day, and they were talking about level 1 painting or drawing, level 2 and level 3, and I'm like, crap, I think I'm at level 1. Anyway, so yeah, the growth continues. Anyway, so I started with, I wanted to do kind of an interesting sky as well. So I laid in sky that was just sort of cut off part of the painting. And once again, I'm using the framing. That was my dog. I'm framing it a little bit different, and I only have tape on 3 sides of the painting. So let's see, and then once the sky was slightly, I could paint around it, then I started adding color to each of the buildings. So once again, establishing the form of the buildings. When I had the forms established for each of the buildings, then I went in with a darker gray and painted over the other paintings. So I let the buildings dry, and then I used the gray and just painted over. So I just did a light wash over the color that I'd already put down for the sides of the building, which I think that really worked out well, but I decided later that it needed to pop a little bit more. So which I'll show you when I fix that. So I am still working on an interesting sky. So I had mixed up, since I'm using my CMY palette, I have the phthalo blue as my blue, which is a little bit greeny. So I used that and added a little bit of the magenta to turn it into more of a ultramarine blue. And I just added a squish. I added a swish of that in the center of the painting, and then I went through and softened all the edges to make sure that there were no hard edges for that. I think it added some interest, and it also added a little bit of a value change, and it leads your eye sort of to that one building right there, which, hopefully you like that. When I finished adding those shadows, so in the 3-step process, I established the form, I put in some shadows, then I went in with my micron again and just started drawing around the buildings. So as I said before, some architectural details, I think I need like a toolkit, right? So I need to go out and study a bunch of stuff and just have things that you can throw on a building to make it interesting. So how do the windows lie on a building, and what kind of columns are there, and what sorts of lines will they be, and where do they have details? So I need to maybe, that would be a nice sketchbook to put stuff like that in there. Anyway, okay, so I am just adding just lines here and there and trying to make interest. I tried to throw in a bunch of TV antennas on the top, which I thought was kind of fun. And then I got the brilliant idea to add in power poles, because I saw Peter Scheler, Scheler, Weeler. Anyway, I love watching him paint, and so it's just one of those ideas I tried to put in there, and actually I thought it was kind of fun. I really kind of like that. And then I added some birds flying all over the place. And I did lose sight of the fact that I had it framed differently, and I put that one bird way too high up on there, but that's okay. He's flying high. He's flying high. So okay, so just still adding some details with my pen. Then I decided, after looking at it, because you always have to tweak your painting because it's never finished and it's never perfect, but I think this was actually a good decision. I went in with a much darker gray, and I decided to add a different type of shadow. So I'm putting these diagonal shadows in there, and when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, that's not actually, the shadows aren't accurate, because that's the left facing buildings are supposed to be the ones in shadow, and so you wouldn't have the diagonal shadow like that. But once I started, I was like, well, oops, too late. Anyway, but I think it did add just a little bit of interest, partially because it's a different shape and it's going a different direction, and then also because it's a different value. So I thought that was kind of essential to just making the painting look more interesting. And so once I got that done, here is actually this painting. This is the final version, and then there's also, for comparison, my fantasy one. And then, yes, please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. I really, really, really appreciate it. And yes, go have fun and go paint something. Yay. All right, have a great day.